12 men changed the world, but their ends were paved with blood, iron, and shadows. Welcome to the fate of the 12. Make sure to subscribe now and hit the notification bell. You cannot afford to miss the upcoming investigations into the remaining apostles. The man we know as the Rock did not begin as a monument. He began as a failure. He was a man of salt and sweat, a fisherman from a backwater province of the Roman Empire, defined by his impulsivity and a devastating moment of cowardice. Yet centuries later, his name is etched into the very foundations of Western civilization. To find the real Peter, we must peel back the layers of tradition and look into the cold waters of the Galilee and the dark cells of Rome. The year is approximately 26 AD. The setting is the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, a place the Romans called Tiberias. It was not a postcard setting of peace. It was a high-pressure economic hub under the thumb of Herod Antipas. Taxes were crushing. The smell of drying fish was omnipresent, and the political atmosphere was a powder keg of messianic longing. In the middle of this lived Simon, son of Jonah. History and archaeology tell us that Bethsaida was a town of modest stone houses where families lived in close-knit clusters. Simon wasn't a scholar, he was a laborer. His hands were calloused from hauling heavy, wet flax nets. His back was scarred by the sun. He was a man of action, likely possessing the rough-edged temperament of those who wrestle with the sea for a living. But the biblical record reveals something deeper than a simple occupation. It reveals a man in search of something that the Roman world couldn't offer. We first see the core of his character in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, verses 4 through 8. The scene is cinematic in its tension. Simon has worked all night, the most productive time for fishing, and caught absolutely nothing. He is exhausted, frustrated, and likely worried about how to pay the temple tax or feed his household. Then a wandering teacher from Nazareth enters his boat. Now when he had left speaking, he said unto Simon, Launch out into the deep, and let down your nets for a draught. And Simon answering said unto him, Master, we have toiled all the night, and have taken nothing. Nevertheless at thy word I will let down the net. And when they had this done, they enclosed a great multitude of fishes, and their net brake. This is the first crack in the fisherman's world. The miraculous catch isn't just a display of power, it is a direct confrontation with Simon's professional reality. He knew the water, he knew the fish weren't there. When the nets began to tear under the weight of the impossible, Simon didn't celebrate the prophet, he was terrified. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. This is the origin moment. It establishes the psychological profile of the man who would lead the church. He is acutely aware of his own unworthiness. He is a man of all or nothing. He doesn't just thank the teacher, he collapses. He recognizes a holiness that makes his own life look dark. Archaeological excavations at the site of Capernaum, just a short distance from Bethsaida, have uncovered what many scholars believe to be the House of Peter. Beneath the remains of an octagonal 5th-century church lies a 1st-century dwelling. Unlike the houses around it, the walls of this specific room were plastered and early Christian graffiti was scratched into the surface. The name Petros appears. This was his base of operations. It wasn't a palace, it was a crowded, dusty home where he lived with his wife and mother-in-law. Simon was a family man with responsibilities. Yet when the call came, he walked away from the only security he had ever known. He was renamed Cephas in Aramaic, or Petros in Greek, the Rock. But at this stage of the investigation, the name seems like an irony. As we track Peter's journey through the dusty roads of Judea, we see a pattern of magnificent instability. He is the one who dares to step out of the boat to walk on water, only to sink seconds later when he realizes the wind is real. He is the one who declares Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, in Matthew 16, only to be rebuked moments later as Satan for trying to stop the divine plan of the cross. "And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Matthew 16:18. For a first-century listener, the gates of hell wasn't just a metaphor. At Caesarea Philippi, where these words were spoken, there stood a massive rock formation with a deep, dark cavern known as the Grotto of Pan. The locals believed it was a literal portal to the underworld. By choosing this backdrop, Jesus was positioning Peter, this flawed, impulsive fisherman, as a defensive wall against the most terrifying forces of the ancient world. But the pressure was about to reach a breaking point. The transition from a disciple to a leader required a crushing. To understand the rock, we have to look at the night the fisherman broke. The investigative record of the Passion points to a man caught between two worlds, his fierce loyalty and his animal instinct for survival. In the Garden of Gethsemane, while the others slept, Peter was the one who drew a sword. He struck Malchus, the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. It was a desperate, violent act of a man trying to fight a spiritual war with fisherman's steel. But hours later, in the courtyard of Caiaphas, the steel was gone. The climate in Jerusalem was lethal. The Roman authorities and the religious elite were hunting for anyone associated with the Galilean rebel. As the fire crackled in the cold night air, Peter was challenged 3 times. "And after a while came unto him they that stood by, and said unto Peter, Surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech bewrayeth thee. Then began he to curse and to swear, saying, I know not the man. And immediately the cock crew." The speech the Bible mentions is a crucial historical detail. Peter's Galilean accent was distinct, rough, and easily identifiable to the urbanites of Jerusalem. He couldn't hide who he was. In his moment of greatest crisis, the rock crumbled into sand. This is where most stories would end: a disgraced follower, a broken promise, a return to the fishing boats in shame. But for Peter, the end of the man was the beginning of the apostle. The investigation now moves from the shores of Galilee to the aftermath of the resurrection, where a breakfast on the beach would change the course of history. How does a man who swore he didn't know Christ become the man who would eventually stand before the Roman emperor's executioners without flinching? The answer lies in a restoration that defies human logic. The restoration of Peter is not merely a theological concept. It is a historical pivot point. To understand how this broken fisherman transitioned from a fugitive in the shadows of Jerusalem to the defiant leader of a global movement, we must look at the shore of the Galilee one final time. In John 21, we find Peter back in his element, and yet he is failing again. He is returned to his nets, perhaps believing his spiritual career was over after the denial. The biblical text records a moment of profound psychological symmetry. Just as his calling began with a miraculous catch, his restoration begins the same way. But the centerpiece of this investigation is the conversation that follows over a charcoal fire. Jesus saith to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? He saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He saith unto him, Feed my lambs. 3 times Peter denied him. 3 times Christ asks the question. This was the formal recommissioning. In the legal and social context of the first century, a public restoration was required to lead. Peter wasn't just forgiven, he was installed as the shepherd. The transformation was immediate and jarring. The man who trembled at the questions of a servant girl in the high priest's courtyard was gone. In his place stood a man who would soon address the very men who orchestrated the crucifixion. 50 days later, at Pentecost, the rock finally hardens. As Jerusalem was packed with pilgrims from across the Roman diaspora, Peter stood in the heart of the city. He didn't speak with the stuttering fear of a fisherman. He spoke with the authority of a herald. Acts 2 records that 3,000 people were baptized in a single day. This created an immediate logistical and political crisis for the Sanhedrin. The authorities thought they had ended the movement by killing the leader. Instead, they found themselves facing a bold surrogate who claimed the leader was alive. The pressure began to mount. Peter was no longer just a religious enthusiast, he was a perceived threat to the Pax Romana and the stability of the temple. Historical records of the time show that the Sadducees, who controlled the temple guard, were hypersensitive to any messianic claims that could provoke a Roman crackdown. Peter was arrested and hauled before the council. Then Peter, filled with the Holy Ghost, said unto them, Ye rulers of the people and elders of Israel, be it known unto you all, and to all the people of Israel, that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom ye crucified, whom God raised from the dead, even by him doth this man stand here before you whole. Acts 4, 8-10. The investigative detail here is found in verse 13. The council was astonished because they perceived Peter was an unlearned and ignorant man. In the Greek text, the word is idiotai, meaning a commoner, someone without formal rabbinic training. The miracle wasn't just the healing of a lame man, it was the sophisticated, fearless rhetoric coming from a man whose hands still smelled of the sea. But the ministry of Peter was not confined to sermons. It was a life under constant surveillance. As the movement spread, the iron gate of the state began to close. By the time we reach Acts 12, the persecution had turned lethal. King Herod Agrippa I, seeking to curry favor with the religious elite, executed James, the brother of John, with the sword. Seeing that it pleased the people, he seized Peter during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This was the maximum security of the ancient world. Peter was placed in a cell, guarded by 4 quaternions of soldiers, 16 men in total, rotating shifts. He was chained between 2 soldiers inside the cell, while others stood sentry at the door. The intent was clear. Peter was the next public execution to signal the death of the Way. The biblical account of his escape is not just a story of divine intervention, it is a study in the supernatural peace of a man who has already faced his greatest fear. And when Herod would have brought him forth, the same night Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. The detail that Peter was sleeping on the eve of his own execution is profound. It shows a man who had completely surrendered his life. The investigation of the text describes a light shining in the prison and an angel striking Peter on the side to wake him. The chains fell off. He walked past the first and second ward. When they were past the first and the second ward, they came unto the iron gate that leadeth unto the city, which opened to them of his own accord, and they went out. Archaeologists studying the Roman prison systems of the first century, such as the Mamertine Prison, though Peter's Judean imprisonment was local, note that such escapes were legally impossible. For a guard, losing a prisoner meant a death sentence. The fact that the movement continued to grow despite these crackdowns is a testament to a power that the Roman iron could not contain. Peter was now a marked man. He was a fugitive from Herod, a person of interest to the Sanhedrin, and eventually a target for the empire itself. But as the ministry moved out of Jerusalem and toward the heart of the world, Rome, the pressure shifted. It was no longer just about surviving a local king. It was about a clash of kingdoms. Peter was moving toward the city of the Caesars, where the claim, "Jesus is Lord," was not just a religious statement, but an act of high treason against the emperor. The investigation now leads us away from the familiar dust of Judea. We track the rock as he travels the Roman roads, heading toward a collision with the most powerful man on earth, Nero. The fisherman from Bethsaida was about to enter the lion's den, and the decision he would make there would define the turning point of his entire legacy. How does a man decide when it is time to stop running? As we move into the next phase of our investigation, we find Peter on the Appian Way, facing the ultimate crossroads of faith. As the investigation shifts from the sun-drenched ports of the Levant to the marble-clad streets of Rome, we witness Peter's transition from a regional leader to a global target. Historical and ecclesiastical traditions, supported by early writers like Clement of Rome and Ignatius of Antioch, place Peter in the capital of the empire during the mid-60s AD. This was not a visit of leisure. It was a strategic entry into the belly of the beast. In Rome, the stakes were no longer about Jewish law or local synagogue disputes. Under the reign of Nero, the atmosphere had turned toxic. In 64 AD, a catastrophic fire leveled much of the city. To divert the public's simmering rage, Nero sought a scapegoat. He found it in the burgeoning community of Christians. Tacitus, the Roman historian, records that the sect was hated for their abominations and their refusal to worship the Roman pantheon. This is the crucible of the turning point. Peter was the shepherd of a flock that was being literally torn apart. Christians were being sewn into the skins of wild animals and hunted by dogs. Others were crucified or turned into human torches to light Nero's gardens at night. The pressure on Peter was twofold. As the primary leader, his death would be the ultimate prize for the Roman prefects, and as the rock, his survival was essential to the morale of the trembling underground church. It is here that we encounter one of the most powerful traditions in the history of faith, the Quo Vadis moment. While not found in the canonical Bible, it is a cornerstone of early Christian narrative, recorded in the Acts of Peter, that aligns perfectly with the psychological profile of the man who once fled the courtyard of the high priest. According to the account, as the persecution reached its peak, the believers in Rome begged Peter to flee. They argued that he was too valuable to lose. Initially, Peter resisted, but eventually he conceded. Under the cover of darkness, he began to walk along the Via Appia, the Appian Way, leaving the city behind. The investigation of this moment is a study in the human heart. Peter, the fisherman, who had already seen his master die, was once again choosing life over the cross. But as he walked away from the smoke of Rome, the account states he encountered a figure walking toward the city. In the vision, Peter recognized the Lord. He fell to his knees and asked, "Quo Vadis, Domine?" Where are you going, Lord? The reply was a dagger to his soul. I am going to Rome to be crucified again. This is the decisive turning point. For Simon Peter, the iron gate of Acts 12 was no longer a prison to be escaped, but a destiny to be embraced. In that moment, the shadow of his denial at the charcoal fire decades earlier was finally and permanently erased. The man who had spent a lifetime oscillating between bold faith and crushing fear finally stood still. He realized that the rock was not built by running, it was built by staying. Peter turned around. He walked back into Rome, back into the fire, and back into the hands of the Roman authorities. He was done being the survivor. He was ready to be the martyr. The biblical foundation for this transition is found in Jesus' own prophecy in the Gospel of John, chapter 21. After the restoration of Peter, Christ gave him a glimpse of his final turning point. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself, and walkest whither thou wouldest. But when thou shalt be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee, and carry thee whither thou wouldest not. This spake he, signifying by what death he should glorify God. John chapter 21, verses 18 through 19. The phrase, "stretch forth thy hands," is widely understood by historical investigators as a first-century idiom for crucifixion. Peter had lived for 30 years with this prophecy hanging over his head. Every time he preached, every time he escaped prison, he knew that eventually another would gird him. His return to Rome was the moment he surrendered his will to that prophecy. He was no longer the impulsive fisherman trying to fight Malthus with a sword. He was the apostle of the Lamb, laying down his life for the sheep. During this final period of Roman ministry, the pressure of leadership didn't lessen, it intensified. He wrote his epistles from what he called Babylon, a common code name for Rome among early Christians. In 1 Peter, we see a man who is preparing his people for the fiery trial. He doesn't write like a man seeking to escape. He writes like a man who has found a peace that the emperor's legions cannot understand. Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. But rejoice, inasmuch as ye are partakers of Christ's sufferings. The investigation of his final days in Rome suggests he may have been held in the Mamertine Prison, a damp, lightless cistern carved into the rock near the Roman Forum. This was the Tullium, the place for those condemned to die. It was cold, cramped, and smelled of death. Yet, the tradition suggests that even there, the rock remained unshaken, reportedly converting his jailers, Processus and Martinian. The turning point was complete. The man of sand had become the man of granite. The fisherman had caught his final and most important catch, the city of Rome itself. But the price of this victory was about to be paid in full. As the Roman guards finally came for him, they were not taking a victim, they were taking a man who had already walked back into the city to die. We now enter the darkest and most sacred portion of our investigation. We leave the streets of Rome and move toward the Vatican Hill, where the rock would meet his cross, and where history and faith would collide in a way that would change the world forever. The investigation now reaches its most harrowing and sacred destination, the Vatican Hill. In the mid-60s AD, this area sat outside the formal walls of Rome, dominated by the gardens of Agrippina and a private circus, a massive arena for chariot racing built by Caligula and completed by Nero. It was not a place of worship, but a place of slaughter. Following his arrest, the legal machinery of the empire moved swiftly against Peter. As a non-citizen, he did not have the right to the swift mercy of the sword, a privilege reserved for men like Paul. For Peter, the fisherman from Galilee, the empire reserved its most brutal and public form of humiliation, the cross. Historical accounts, most notably from the church historian Eusebius and the North African scholar Tertullian, converge on a singular, chilling detail regarding this execution. It is a detail that has defined the iconographic memory of the apostle for 2 millennia. As the soldiers prepared the wooden beams, Peter made a final staggering request. He argued that he was not worthy to die in the same manner as his Lord. He who had denied Christ 3 times, he who had been restored by the shore of the sea, could not bring himself to mimic the posture of the Savior in his final moments. He requested to be crucified upside down. "I beseech you," the executioners, "crucify me thus, with the head downward and not otherwise." The Acts of Peter. The Roman guards, likely indifferent to the theological nuances, but amused by the added cruelty, complied. To the Roman mind, this was simply an inversion of a standard procedure. To Peter, it was a final act of profound humility. Imagine the scene at the Circus of Nero. The central spine of the arena, the spina, was marked by a massive Egyptian obelisk, the same obelisk that stands today in the center of St. Peter's Square. Peter would have been stripped of his garments, his body, now aged and weathered by decades of travel and toil, exposed to the jeers of the Roman crowd. The physical reality of an inverted crucifixion is a study in physiological agony. In a standard crucifixion, death often comes through a combination of exhaustion, dehydration, and eventual asphyxiation. In an inverted position, the process is accelerated and intensified. The weight of the internal organs presses against the diaphragm, making every breath a conscious, agonizing struggle. Blood pools in the brain, leading to excruciating cranial pressure and eventual rupture or heart failure. Yet the traditional record suggests that even in this state, the rock remained a shepherd. While the Bible does not record his final words on the cross, the early church fathers described a man who used his final breaths not to curse Nero, but to encourage the believers who watched from the edges of the circus. He was stretching forth his hands, just as Jesus had predicted in John 21. And when he had said this, he breathed his last. The death of Peter was intended by Nero to be an ending, a decapitation of the Christian movement that would scatter the remaining superstitious followers. But the investigation of history shows it had the opposite effect. In the Roman world, where power was defined by the ability to inflict death, the sight of a man embracing death with such defiant humility was a seismic shock to the system. According to ancient tradition, after the life had left his body, a few courageous believers, among them a man named Marcellus, took the body down from the cross. They could not afford a public funeral. They moved quickly under the cover of night, carrying the broken remains of the apostle just a short distance from the circus to a nearby pagan cemetery on the Vatican Hill. This was a poor man's grave. There were no monuments, no marble inscriptions, and no guards. He was placed in a simple trench in the earth, close to the wall of the circus where he had just died. To the Roman authorities, he was just another dead criminal in a mass of nameless graves. But the rock was now buried in the soil of the capital of the world. The martyrdom of Peter marks the fulfillment of the turning point. The man who had once been terrified by a charcoal fire was now the foundation of a faith that would outlast the very empire that tried to bury him. But as the dirt settled over the grave of the fisherman, a new mystery began, one that would remain hidden for nearly 2,000 years, until the shovels of archaeologists finally struck something hard beneath the high altar of a basilica. The investigation now moves from the blood-stained sand of the arena to the silent, dark chambers beneath the earth. We go in search of the evidence. We go to see if the rock is still there. For centuries, the burial of Peter remained a matter of pure faith, a tradition whispered in the catacombs and celebrated in the construction of the massive Constantinian basilica in the 4th century. But for the modern investigator, the question remained, was the fisherman actually there? In 1939, a routine project to prepare a tomb for Pope Pius XI beneath St. Peter's Basilica led to one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in human history. As workers broke through the floor, they didn't just find dirt, they found a city of the dead, a Roman necropolis perfectly preserved beneath the church. Among the ornate pagan tombs, archaeologists found a much humbler area. Directly beneath the high altar, they discovered a simple red-plastered wall covered in ancient graffiti. An inscription stood out, scratched into the stone by a pilgrim nearly 1,900 years ago. In Greek, this translates to, "Peter is here." Further investigation revealed a small niche, a tropeon or trophy built into the wall. Inside that niche, wrapped in a purple cloth threaded with gold, were the remains of a man. Forensic analysis conducted in the 1960s confirmed the bones belonged to a robust male aged between 60 and 70 who lived in the 1st century. Significantly, the feet were missing, a detail that aligns chillingly with the practice of inverted crucifixion, where executioners would often crudely cut off the feet to remove a body from the cross quickly. The rock was no longer a metaphor, he was a physical reality, resting exactly where the early church said he was. But the legacy of Peter is not found in bone or stone. It is found in the radical transformation of the human spirit. The investigation of his life presents us with a paradox that continues to challenge every viewer today. How does a man who was defined by his failures become the primary architect of the most influential movement in history? The answer lies in the call to faith that Peter's life embodies. He was a man of profound contradictions. He was brave enough to walk on water, but weak enough to sink. He was loyal enough to draw a sword in Gethsemane, but fearful enough to deny his best friend hours later. He was, in every sense, a sinful man, as he confessed on that boat in Galilee. Yet, this is the very reason his story resonates across 2 millennia. If God had chosen a perfect man, a scholar, or a sinless hero, the message of the gospel would be out of reach for the rest of us. Instead, he chose the fisherman. He chose the man who broke under pressure, so that he could demonstrate that his kingdom is not built on human strength, but on divine grace. Peter's journey from the salt air of Bethsaida to the blood-stained soil of Rome proves that your past does not disqualify your future. Your moments of denial do not have to be your final chapter. The Rock wasn't a man who never fell. He was a man who, after every fall, looked back at the Master and chose to get up again. Today, the shadow of that fisherman looms over the entire world. From the architecture of the Vatican to the smallest village churches in the furthest corners of the earth, his name is a beacon of hope for the flawed and the forgotten. He stands as a historical witness that the gates of hell did not prevail. As we conclude this investigation into the fate of the Apostle Peter, we are left with more than just archaeological evidence. We are left with a question that echoes from the Appian Way. Quo Vadis? Where are you going? In a world that is often as chaotic and hostile as Nero's Rome, the life of Peter reminds us that the greatest investigation you will ever undertake is the one into your own heart. God does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. He took a man of sand and made him a rock. And if He could do that with a fisherman from Galilee, imagine what He can do with you. The investigation into the 12 continues. The blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church, and the next story we uncover will take us even deeper into the cost of following the Christ. Stay tuned. This is the fate of the 12.